Hi guys, welcome back to part 2 of this gouache palette setup and review video. My name is Mina and on this channel we do art stuff. So yeah, hi, welcome back. This is part 2. It should be going up the same day as part 1, but maybe a little bit later. And this is thankfully a much shorter video. I decided to do it as a time lapse and talk over it. The speed for this one, I believe it is 4 times real speed for the whole thing. So I'm not going quite this fast in real life. So what I started with was I drew like a really a really sort of colour blocky kind of landscape to do here. And the first thing I did was I mixed up some cobalt turquoise and the peacock blue, both by Shinhan. Both re-wetted beautifully, and I think I added a touch of sap green just to like green it up a little bit. But it's still very sort of tealy, turquoisey blue colour. And then I just go in and start, you can't really see the pencil markings, but I sort of broke up the landscape into different sort of quote unquote hills, as it were. And I sort of worked out a colour palette beforehand off camera. And I'm just going ahead and mixing up the different colours that I'm using for it. And I can't remember exactly which colours I used for this one. I think it was alizarin crimson and a bit of yellow and a bit of burnt sienna. I think. I might be wrong. This one's carmine. This one was carmine with a bit of yellow and burnt sienna. And then I'm mixing up some of the violet from Shinhan with one of the lilac watercolor, and again a little bit of burnt sienna. I added burnt sienna to a lot of the colors or a lot of the mixes just to get a bit more of a muted shade rather than something super bright. I didn't want to add I actually did this one mostly without adding any white to any of the colors. Towards the end, the last couple of hills ended up being quite close in shade once the gouache had dried, so I had to go back and do some adjusting, which you'll see later in the video. But whilst we're watching me paint these little hills, I thought I would talk a little bit about just gouache in general and how I felt about these colors. I think, to be quite honest, I think they all re-wet really well. The only one I had any real issues with as such, and I kind of don't really like using the word issues because it wasn't really an issue, was the Prussian Blue by Winsor & Newton. And that one dried and became really crumbly in the palette, in the little pan. And actually re-wetting that one was probably the hardest out of all of them. Otherwise, everything else was really easy to re-wet. It's, the gouache all mixed beautifully, even between the different brands. Much like with watercolors, they mixed well with the watercolors that I have in the palette as well, where I mixed some of those together. Just in general, really enjoyed using them. The biggest issue I have with gouache and the biggest struggle I have with gouache is just getting the consistency right so that it's not too thin and therefore becomes a bit streaky, and not too thick that I then can't control the thickness of the line. So you can see here the little page in that book where I was swatching out the different colors to come up with the initial palette. And yeah, so that was my biggest struggle with the gouache, was getting it to not be streaky. And I was using 100% cotton watercolor paper. I mentioned it in part 1. This is Winsor & Newton professional watercolor paper in the hot pressed. I'm used to using cold press, but that doesn't really seem to make a difference for me when it comes to gouache, whether I'm using hot press or not in terms of streakiness. That's really going to come down to the consistency of the paint and how much water I'm using. Some paints are naturally a little bit less streaky in general. It's usually the more transparent ones are a bit more on the streaky side. But like I said, I was having some real trouble with that, but that's been my trouble with gouache all along. That's not specific to any particular brand of gouache, at least not that I can tell. And the other thing with gouache that's a little bit different than watercolor that I found, mostly with watercolor, you typically have a bit of a drying shift, and what that means is that the color is a bit different wet compared to when it's dry. And usually with watercolor, the paints will dry lighter than what you put them down, what goes down on paper. However, with gouache, it's a bit more tricky. Light colors tend to dry darker, and dark colors tend to dry lighter. So that gets a little bit confusing, a little bit tricky, and you'll see later how, you know, at the moment it looks like all the different hills have pretty good color definition between them. They're not too close in color, but later you'll see that two of the hills kind of end up looking very close in color, and I have to go back in and adjust a couple of times to get the right sort of shades, which is fine. That's the good thing with gouache. Much like with watercolor, you can layer between, you can do multiple layers on them. However, with traditional gouache, which is what this is, it's water activated, you have to be careful when it comes to layering that you're not adding too much water to the previous layers, so you don't accidentally reactivate the layers below, if that is not what you are trying to do. Obviously, if that's what you're trying to do, then great. So I won't be showing it in this video because it turned out absolutely horrendous. You might actually see a clip of it towards the end. I did do a second piece on the right hand side where I decided to paint the background in like the dark green, let it dry completely, and then I was going to come back and paint flowers on top of it. And I did start doing that, but I think what happened was I'd ended up putting down too thick a layer of the dark green on the right hand side for the background, and the moment I touched the page with any kind of wet paint, it no matter how little water was on the brush, it just completely lifted and started blending with the colors I was putting down, and it just wasn't looking right. You'll see here that I'm painting on that background. It was just too thick. I think it needed to be a slightly more watery consistency, not quite as thick. And yeah, like I said, I'm still learning. I think what I might do in the future is maybe do the background in acrylic paint and then paint on top of that with gouache. Maybe I might give that a try and see if that works better, to not have a water activated background for this type of painting that I had in mind. Alternatively, I could also try some acrylic wash. That's another option. So acrylic gouache is essentially a matte acrylic paint, as it were. It's just all it is gouache paint that isn't water reactive. So you can dilute it and mix it with water while it's wet, but once it's dried, that's it. It's dry. You can't reactivate it. So you wouldn't be able to set up a palette like this with acrylic gouache, because once it dries out, then it's basically useless. And that's partly why I was attracted to traditional gouache, because I didn't like the waste factor when it comes to acrylics, and acrylic gouache as well. But who knows, maybe for like things like I said, like for backgrounds and stuff, I could see its value in having something like acrylic gouache. So it might be something I just get a few colors of for like backgrounds and things where I don't want the color to shift after it's dried. But we'll see. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to even do that. So yeah, at the moment what you can see me doing here is I'm adjusting the different layers. You can see now those two, the fourth and fifth layer of those hills going down, the two purples are very similar, and when they were wet they didn't look that they didn't look like they were that similar at all. They definitely looked like there was more definition between them, but that was completely lost in the drying process and with that drying shift. So I'm trying to establish a better color variation between those two hills. So I made the first one a little bit lighter, and then I make the second to last one a little bit darker to try and, like I said, have a bit more definition there. And I believe I even go in and make the very last hill even darker than that to kind of really make them pop. Okay, you can see here my pitiful attempt at the floral painting on the right. So let's just ignore that while we peel off the washi tape for this one. Like I said, it just did not turn out how I wanted, so we're just gonna pretend it's not there. Anyway, yeah, just peeling up the washi tape, and then I think I'm gonna take the paper off the sheet off the block. I'll show you how I do that. I think I just use a palette knife. Yep, there we go. Just slide it in and run it all the way around the sides of the block to take the sheet off. And then actually I think I got my paper cutter out and trimmed it, so cut it in half since that's how I taped it up. There is a pencil line down the middle there, so I knew exactly where to cut. And then at first I thought that's it, was done at this point, and I sort of set it aside, didn't think about it, and then later I came back and I was like, actually, you know what, I kind of feel like it needs something else. So I came back and I added in some gold detailing with this gold brush pen, paint pen. It's a brush pen tip, like actual bristle brush tip, but it's a paint pen in gold. It's from Japan. I'm not sure where you could get it. But yeah, I really feel like this little touch of gold at the end really brought the whole piece together and made it look like finished, like properly finished. Anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this little 2-part video mini series of sorts about gouache paint. I still have lots to learn about gouache. I would love to hear some of your favorite resources for learning about gouache, and maybe some of your favorite gouache tutorials. I'd love to try some out. So let me know in the comment section down below if you have any suggestions that you think I should check out. And yeah, I will see you in another video very soon. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you've enjoyed this video, and hit subscribe if you have not subscribed already for lots more fun things coming your way. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye for now.